What would you do if you could time travel? Would you go back in time and try and correct your past mistakes and make yourself a better person? Would you go far into the future to see where human civilization has taken us? Would you go to ancient Rome and watch fights in the Colosseum? I'd probably end up doing the third one. That sounds like the most fun and least likely to collapse my reality. I can go see the dinosaurs or visit Pompeii before Mount Vesuvius erupted. I could see so much history, and I think that would be the coolest use of time travel. Filling up all the histories that time has lost. That would be cool. Unfortunately, we can't time travel. There's no way for us to travel faster than the speed of light, which is theoretically what's needed to time travel. We can't see the past as it was, and we'll never be able to fill in the gaps in our history books. That might be a terrible way of looking at it, but it's true. It really doesn't matter what you want to do with time travel, because I'm pretty sure that we'll never be able to do it. We may not be able to time travel, and we may never be able to recover human history through it, but we can always imagine what it's like. What time travel might be like and how it might affect people's lives. It's a pretty cool concept, and that's one of my favorite parts about time travel movies. We can try and figure out how time travel would work, or we could just have fun with it. Sometimes people use it to go back in time to stop a planetary war from breaking out and destroying humanity. Others will go back and save people from tragedy. Ash from the Evil Dead trilogy goes back to medieval times with a chainsaw for a hand, but that's beside the point. No matter what people do in time travel movies, they always have to tell us how they do it. They have to believe in a certain way to traverse our timeline, and then throw our characters into the fray to try and explore those concepts. These movies almost always believe in something, and that's what I want to dissect. How these time travel movies portray jumping into the past, and what that means to us, people who will never be able to do that jumping. If we want to understand what these movies believe in, we first need to understand how they work. There are two types of time travel movies. Technically three if you want to add time loop movies into the mix, but that's another video for another day. And plus, there's already a video about time loops by Jacob Geller. He's a really cool creator, and it's a really good video that talks about the nihilism present in time loop media. It's super in-depth, and you should go check it out. Anyways, the two types of time travel movies are dynamic timeline movies and fixed timeline movies. Dynamic timeline, or multiversal timeline movies, both essentially the same concept, are examples of time travel where your actions in the past affect your future, branching off the timeline to create a new reality when you change what happened in the past. This type of time travel is very open-ended, and it believes in free will. Fixed timeline movies are those where your time traveling has occurred already. These movies travel on one timeline and can't really diverge, meaning that when a person time travels, their actions have already occurred. It's a little hard to wrap your head around, but in another sense, they have already time traveled, and their actions are inevitable. Both types examine free will through time travel, and a lot of the commentary is regarding whether or not that free will matters. And spoilers for these movies. Back to the Future was made in 1985, and despite how fun and adventurous it may be, it deals with some pretty heavy themes. Marty's accidental misuse of the DeLorean sends him back in time to 1955, where he accidentally erases the moment where his mom and dad meet and starts to unravel his own existence. We could talk about how that's an inevitable grandfather paradox, but the movie afterward, Back to the Future 2, highlights the type of time travel Marty and Doc experience. They go through the theoretical dynamic timeline form of time travel, and I'll let Doc explain it for you.
Imagine that this line represents time. Here's the present, 1985, the future, and the past. Prior to this point in time, somewhere in the past, the timeline skewed into this tangent, creating an alternate 1985. Alternate to you, me, and Einstein, but reality for everyone else.
This type of time travel is the anything goes kind of time travel, and enforces the many worlds theory. It doesn't matter what you do according to this house of theoretical time travel, because you will always end up in an alternate universe in another version of you's timeline. It doesn't matter. In the world of Back to the Future, Marty's actions are never irreparable. In every single situation he puts himself in, he and Doc can fix it and put themselves back onto the right timeline. And by the way, the right timeline that Doc and Marty put themselves on is the one that Marty made at the end of Back to the Future 1, and not his true timeline home. What's the point of living a life if somebody's going to travel back in time and fix it for you? In the case of the meanie of the trilogy, Biff, in the second Back to the Future, he takes a sports almanac from 2015 and gives it to his younger self in 1955. He does this so that he can bet on all the sports events from 1950 to 2000 and become rich. This one action consequentially means that 60 years of the older Biff's life got erased because we're no longer a part of that original timeline. And in Back to the Future 3, there's a picture that Marty finds in 1955 of Doc standing next to the clock tower that's being built in 1885. Before Doc got zapped all the way back to the Wild West, there was a photo record of somebody else standing in front of that clock tower, not Doc. And now he's gone, completely erased. Clara Clayton had a canyon named after her after she died, a legacy that will live on for as long as Hill Valley exists. But that's also wiped from the history books after the events of Back to the Future 3, when Marty and Doc save her from falling into that canyon. Throughout the trilogy, multiple rewrites of history happen, and the history books of Hill Valley look very different than before the events of the trilogy take place. Why would I want to make my mark on Hill Valley if my slate is going to get wiped clean? What's the point of making history if that history is not permanent? Philosophers don't really talk about time travel too much, but that's probably because they were too busy dealing with questions about human nature and the point of our existence, but whatever. Friedrich Nietzsche is a German philosopher that is known for his crazy influence on contemporary philosophy. One of his most popular discussions was about nihilism. Friedrich believes that, quote, every belief, every considering something is true, is necessarily false because there is simply no true world. Nihilism rejects all other beliefs, including religious and philosophical, and instead believes in none of it. In the context of nihilism, that rejection provides the foundation for a lot of his thinking on what life is all about. He comes to the conclusion in his works that life is ultimately meaningless, that all of the actions we do as humans, as a race, are pointless in the grand scheme of things. Another philosopher, Helmut Thielicke, that's a crazy name to try and pronounce. Anyways, he sums up Nietzsche's idea that, quote, nihilism literally has only one truth to declare, namely, that ultimately nothingness prevails and the world is meaningless. We're an afterthought in the universe, a tiny snapshot of the lifetime of everything, and our own lifespans are snapshots of that already tiny speck of time human civilization has existed. Nietzsche argues that because of this insignificance in the world, our life has no meaning or structure. This realization of nothing mattering provides us with two things: complete freedom and agonizing existential dread. This is where nihilism separates itself into two actionable philosophies: passive nihilism and active nihilism. Passive nihilism is what results from people pursuing the existential dread part, laying down, giving up on the world and its people because ultimately it doesn't matter. They either can't reconcile with the fact that existence is pointless, or they shrug it off and continue believing in worldly moral systems. The other, more favorable perspective of nihilism is active nihilism, or optimistic nihilism, or existentialism. This philosophy has way too many names, and there are some tiny differences between them, but overall they're pretty much identical. It's acknowledging that the life we're all leading is meaningless, but instead rejecting that idea and embracing existence and the meaning we can create out of it. Jean-Paul Sartre, these names are getting out of hand. He's a French existentialist that coined the phrase, existence precedes essence. It's the implications of a universe with no purpose, bringing creatures that are born without that purpose. Us. Sartre and other existentialists believe in creating that purpose through ambitions and aspirations and will. The will that Sartre is talking about becomes very free once we learn about the nothing that surrounds us, preceding our birth and continuing long after we're gone. Free will is entwined with the idea of active nihilism, and optimistic nihilism, and existentialism. They all revolve around the idea of paving your path in life. Free will is what makes us human, and it's what lets us grow and progress as a society. This theme of free will is echoed so loudly in time travel movies, and the debate on whether or not we actually have any is the topic of a lot of them. Sartre and Nietzsche may not have necessarily been thinking about the consequences of going back in time and whether that mattered while they were developing their philosophies, but I definitely think that their concepts can migrate over to time travel movies super easily. And existentialism is what I'm landing on for a term. It's way easier than saying optimistic nihilism. In the case of Back to the Future, the time traveling that Marty does gives me the impression that the universe Marty lives in is meaningless. The lack of guidance or predetermination in Marty's time traveling antics means that no being or force is controlling him, making him inherently unimportant in the universe. The idea that Marty can accidentally ruin his own history by kissing his mom implies that we are on our own in the universe. Marty being able to erase the past and write a new one begs the question as to why we should even try, which would be a nihilistic approach. The reason this doesn't fit with Nietzsche's nihilistic ideals is that Marty does something with it. He gives his life purpose instead of jumping around time without reason. He has this incredible tool in a pointless world, and Marty doesn't just have fun with it, even though he totally could. He changes his family's history for the better. He helps his father stand up for himself, and he saves his friend from dying in the Wild West. Even though nihilists know that those actions wouldn't really do much for humanity in the grand scheme of things, existentialists reject that cynicism and make themselves responsible for their purpose. As Doc says at the end of Back to the Future 3,
It means your future hasn't been written yet. No one's has. Your future is whatever you make it. So make it a good one. Both of you.
if our lives are limited and insignificant, it's our job to make them worth living and make it easier for the people around us. One of the best examples of how this existentialism happens is in Biff's billionaire reality. Even if Marty had brought that reality on himself, he still realizes he can and will change it. If Marty saw Biff's pleasure paradise and gave up, wondering what the point of trying to save it is, he would fall into a more passive nihilistic category. But it's that ambition, initiative, and aspiration that make an existentialist an existentialist. The rejection of the endless march of time and embracing the meaning they can create for themselves. And that's a surprisingly optimistic way to think about such a depressing topic. Maybe that's why it's called optimistic nihilism. But not all time travel movies are inherently existential. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure has the best example of non-existential time travel I have seen, or that I enjoy. The premise of the movie, in case you haven't seen it, which you totally should because it's a blast, are about the two titular teenagers failing their history class, and in order to pass, they use a time machine to pull historical figures from different time periods for their report. Oh, also, the fate of the world depends on this report, but whatever. This is the other form of time travel theorics we talked about earlier, the fixed timeline theory. This theory states that the past has already happened, and that all actions done by a time-traveling individual have already happened in that timeline. For example, Bill and Ted need to help all the historical figures they've gathered escape from prison. To do that, they remind themselves to time travel once this is all over, and help their current selves out. They think of a hiding spot to put the cell keys, and the keys are now there because the future Bill and Ted have already placed them there. That's basically how fixed timelines work. Another very good example of this is Time Crimes, a Spanish low-budget time travel movie. In it, a man named Hector gets chased by a murderer into a time machine, where he gets sent back an hour earlier. Through this, he has to ensure that his previous self gets into that time machine to prevent a paradox and becomes the murderer that he was originally running from. This goes on for another loop, but the important idea is that all of his time-traveling selves all exists in the first moments of the movie. Hector 2, and Hector 3 are already present, and their actions are static. They can't change outside of the timeline that has already occurred. The only reason we believe otherwise is the way the story is told. Lastly, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban has a super compelling time travel sequence in which they use the time turner to save Buckbeak and Sirius Black. Don't really need any context. I just love Harry Potter. But all of these events that happen pre-Time Turner also happen post-Time Turner, and both Harrys exist at both points in time. It's told in the exact same narrative structure as Time Crimes. But regardless of all that, all of these movies believe in some sort of structure or path that the universe is traveling on. If there was no path, they could destroy the fixed timeline theory and do whatever they please. But the nature of their time traveling prevents them from having any free will. They're destined to repeat those actions when they time travel, regardless of whether they want to or not. Bill and Ted were always going to pass that history report, and Hector was always going to chase himself into a time machine. These characters are just following their predetermined paths, ones that are governed by either the laws of the universe or this specific portrayal of time travel. Regardless, they're governed by something, and therefore have some meaning tethered to it. Fixed timeline time travel movies aren't existential at all. Because if life was meaningless, it wouldn't matter what Bill and Ted do on their excellent adventures or their bogus journeys. From an existential, dynamic timeline perspective, the timeline would have to split and create a new reality. But it doesn't. In Time Crimes, Hector 1, 2, or 3 would in theory be able to deviate from their destinies and save their wife much easier. But this strict rule that fixed timeline movies follow prevents Hector from doing so. These movies aren't existential because they don't believe in free will. It may sound very depressing and pessimistic, not being able to decide your own fate, but it's not inherently existential. The universe has a set path to follow, guiding your actions, and when you're time traveling, it's all up to them, not you. The predetermination goes against both the philosophies of existentialism and nihilism. Ultimately, in fixed timeline movies, you don't have any free will while you're time traveling, so maybe you never have any free will. Doesn't that sound boring, though? Free will makes us human, and being able to exercise it makes us even more so. Fixed timeline movies are what I think of when I think of a good, captivating, and accurate time travel concept. How all the characters come full circle, and how their narratives unravel themselves to reveal these characters through time. But it's not what I want. I want to be able to do whatever I want in the past, in the future, or whenever. I want the idea of time travel to stay nebulous and for people to implement it in whatever stories they want, because there's so much fun to watch. As Sartre said, existence precedes essence. All of these concepts come packaged with the universe, but it's us who give these stories meaning. Dynamic time travel helps us come to terms with our existence, with why we're here. It helps us navigate all the nothingness that surrounds us. Fixed time travel movies, in their nature, can't do that, because they're stuck on this one timeline, this one past, present, and future that's already determined for its inhabitants. Fixed timeline movies are not my favorite time travel motif. Not because I get bored of them, the limitations are the whole point of telling a story like that, but because it doesn't free me. It also doesn't give me existential dread, but that's probably a good thing. I don't know how to sum up how you should feel about this concept, that free will is tethered to your humanity, but I think you should believe in it. I know I do. You know how Doc was talking about how none of our futures have been written and we should create our own, and that we should make it a good one? I believe in that. It may be inconsequential what I believe in, though, because it's going to get lost in the void, the empty, complete nothingness that shadows all of our lives. And so will all the time travel movies that I've been talking about. Who knows how long Eastwood's name is going to be etched into that canyon? Or how long this almanac winning streak will last? Who knows how long our very real history is going to last, or if we'll even be a part of it? I don't really care to know, and I don't think you should either. Because at the end of the day, or at the end of everything, it doesn't matter.